Hello and welcome to Model Kit Stuff, and today we have a quick tips video for you that might not be that quick, in fairness. In fact, we might have to break this down into more than one video. But this video comes at a special request from a long-time supporter of the channel, Ron Calvary of the Model Ship fame. Ron sort of asked me to consider doing a video on the basics of applying decals. So I've sort of covered it off previously in some of my builds, but actually I've never done a standalone video on how to do it. And so it's probably time to do it. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by covering off the tools. Then we're going to cover off how to apply decals, some do's and don'ts, and then we'll deal with troubleshooting when you get an issue with decals, which means I'm going to have to try and emulate them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go away and paint this up into something a bit matter, and then we can get some decals on here and show you all the different problems that you might come across. Let's deal with what tools we need for decals. I guess at a most basic level, you need something to put water in that is clean. If, like me, you use a dedicated water trough, then if you've not used it for a week or two, then it's always worth giving it a good wash first, because my experience is that you'll get dust and stuff collecting here, and as soon as you put some water in, put your decal on, the dust is like a magnetized and comes to the decal, and then when you come to put your decal on, inevitably you've got some dust under there or a hair or something. So water trough, make sure it's clean. I will give this a quick wash before I use it. But yeah, you need some form of container to hold water. Tweezers, ideally with not too sharp but not too wide, I guess. You could get away with slightly wider than this, though I prefer quite narrow ones, but that's just me. A knife, some scissors, pad of paper, tissue paper, toilet paper, something like that. Now, at a most basic level, this is all you need for applying decals and getting them to sit down. However, most people take it slightly beyond there, so you'll need some additional tools to just up your game a little bit. Some form of decal solution, such as Humbrol's Decal Fix, or Microsol and Microset. A brush for applying your decal solution and moving your decal about, and a pin. All will be revealed. A cotton bud. Now, this is one occasion where I use the expensive Tamiya cotton buds. There's two reasons why I prefer to use these with decals. Number one is they are very, very absorbent. Yeah, they are very tightly woven, so they're very absorbent. So that's really great. They don't get all soggy and wet like an ordinary cotton bud does, and then it starts all coming apart and coming off, and you've got cotton buds stuck on your decal and all that sort of stuff. So that's the first thing. They're very absorbent. Second thing is they are very lint free, so you don't have the issues of hairs and things coming off. So I prefer to use these for decals, and I guess the other advantage is they have a little bit of a point, and that could be an advantage in certain circumstances. Finally, this is a makeup removing pad. And I suppose we should also say some form of clear coat. So what is all of this for? Right, let's talk you through it. Clear coat is something that we put on our model prior to putting decals on. Now, some people will tell you that that is so that the decals will adhere better to the model, which I'm not sure how true that is or not. Some people will tell you that it helps with the reducing of silvering, which is trapped air underneath the decal, or at least that's my understanding, and that is why I do it. And I definitely find, having experimented with it, that putting a clear coat down does help with that process. Of course, the quality of your decal plays a part in it as well. But at the end of the day, smoothing out the surface of your paint before you put your decal down just helps with removing the likelihood of trapping air. We put a clear varnish down and that just helps with the decal settling. Water trough goes without saying. We need to soak our water slide decals. Now, people have different ways of doing it. Some people dip them and then put them to one side and let the dipped water soak into the paper, which takes a bit longer. Some people will use warm water. I personally don't, and I'll explain why when we get to doing it. But what is important is that you need some form of container to have some water in that's larger than your decal. Tweezers, you need them for putting your decal in the water bath and for taking them out of the water bath. I also use them for helping me place the decal. As a beginner, I suggest you don't do that. I'm not showing off. I've just done it for many years, and I'm quite confident with moving things around with a set of tweezers. But primarily, we're using them for putting your decal in and out of the water bath. And also, in the instances where you are sliding the decal off your paper, they're handy for holding the paper while you do that. Of course, not all decals need to be applied using the slide it off the paper method. In fact, that can get in the way sometimes. Again, we will explain all. Knife, absolutely not for removing decals from the paper. The knife is used actually to help the decal settle in things like panel lines and grooves. Scissors, it's very straightforward. This is how we remove our decals from its paper. Cut them out before we put them in our water bath. Some people have dedicated scissors that they only use for decals. I personally don't, but a nice small pair of scissors, nail scissors, something like that will do really nicely. These are Tamiya micro scissors, actually designed for cutting hard plastic, and I use them for my scratch building and for decals. Paper, I use that for blotting. Once you've put the decal down, quite often there's a large amount of water around. Once you're happy that you've located it properly, you can just use this for blotting. Sometimes you're putting the whole thing down and taking up a load, and other times you're just touching it with the corner to suck some water out from underneath the decal. Lots of uses for it, but it's all around getting the decal to sit and removing water from between the decal and the surface of your model. Okay, decal fix solutions. Basically, they all work in the same sort of way. It's a mainly water solution with some form of small amount of additives, an acid or something along that lines, which will help soften the decal so that it will settle better. And sometimes that can look quite dramatic and your decal will wrinkle up and what have you, and you wonder what you've done, but then as it dries out it settles back down, and really it's to help you have a painted on look. Now there's lots and lots of different varieties, and different modelers will swear by different brands. Personally, these are my two go-to brands. I think this is a good all-rounder. It's stronger than Microset in my opinion, but I like Microsol for getting really difficult decals to settle. So it all depends on your decals. Decals come in all different types of thicknesses. and they can present you with all sorts of different issues. So these products just help you get that decal where you want it and to sit properly. The brush, the paintbrush, this is dedicated to just applying decal solutions. So it's to make sure that we don't put any contamination, any paint particles or other chemicals into the decal that might affect it. And it's also to make sure that we don't put any of the decal solutions in our paint. So yeah, I have a dedicated brush for decaling. It also is handy for moving the decal around your model and helping with positioning. So a dedicated brush. This is a size 0. I find that's a good size. You don't want anything too thin really, and you don't want anything too big, because you're then putting lots of liquid around and what have you. So this for me is a good size. So that's what we use the brush for. The pin, that's used for removing air bubbles, and we'll show you that hopefully when we come to put our decals down. But the idea is you've got an air bubble, you give it a poke with your needle, put some more setting solution in which floods underneath, pushing the air out and settles your bubble down to the surface. Cotton swab, it's really just to help you remove excess liquid if you need to. I also use it as like a squeegee, so you can roll it over the surface of your decal to help squeeze water and air out, so they are quite handy. And the makeup removing pad, well, it's basically several layers of cotton wool, and I don't use it very often, I'm pleased to say, because the use of this is for quickly mopping up emergencies. Spilt water, spilt decal solution, you can bang it on and it sucks all that liquid up really quickly before it runs everywhere and ruins things. Okay, step 1, a varnish coat, a clear coat, and you want it to be glossy. Now you can put it on with either your airbrush or, as I'm doing here, a flat brush. I'm doing it with a brush because it's quicker than setting my airbrush up and cleaning my airbrush after. And you only really need one coat, just a good covering, to get it all nice and shiny. Now for me, I just find it easier to get the decals on doing this. It also means you've added a protective coat to your model, to your paint, so if you do what like I do and maneuver your decals with your tweezers, you're less likely to cause any scratches or anything like that. So what we will do is we will leave one wing unclear coated so that you can see what difference, if any, it makes. Now, some people will tell you that putting a gloss coat down will help prevent getting any silvering. I believe that it definitely helps. I've certainly found that putting a gloss coat on helps with that, but the quality of your decals is also at play in there. The age of your decals could also be at play in there. So there's lots of little variables. So as with everything, it's not as simple and as plain sailing as this is the rule, and if you do this, this won't happen, and if you don't do this, this will happen. You could get silvering no matter what you do. There we go. I'm just slapping this on. I'm not worried too much about how well it's gone on. We'll leave the top surface of that upper wing free of varnish just to show you. In fact, what we might do is do a line so we can put a decal partly over it and see what difference it makes, if any. There we go. We will let that dry, and that's our first step done. Okay, we have completed our first step, which was to add some gloss varnish, which we've done. I'm just doing one coat. If you're building a model more seriously, you might do that to a better standard. Now, another thing that I've done off camera is I have placed 3 decals, and all I've done with these decals is put them in the water and then taken them out of the water and put them on. I've not used any softener. I haven't tried to place them in any way. I haven't even pressed them down. I've just put them on, let the water dry naturally to show you what happens if you just place your decal and walk away. What you can see, particularly here on the tail, is that we have got some settling into the texture of the surface. So it's naturally dropped, but what will happen is it will drop so far and then it'll tighten and it'll just stay where it is. So what we can see the effect is that this panel line here and here, it basically becomes like a softer line. So it's not quite got the sharpness of the plastic part. And you'll see that here as well. You can see on the decal there, it has settled, and we can see the ribbing here, but you pretty much lose the line of the panel. And on this one, well, we've put it over a large lump just to show you what happens. And what happens is we get a load of creases and stuff. So we're going to be talking about avoiding those problems, solving those problems, and what you need to do to get your decals to sit properly through the other decals that we're going to put on. So just a reminder, clean, fresh water. Now, some people will tell you that you need to use warm water. I'll tell you that that's actually not necessary. What the warm water does is it helps soften your decal a little bit. But the reality is warm water goes cold water very quickly. So unless you're going to constantly change your water every couple of decals, most people start with warm water, end up using cold water. For me, I'm 45 years into using cold water. I've never had a problem with decals because of cold water. So for me, I just use a little bit of tap water. It's as simple as that. Okay, so I'm going to show you how I go about putting decals on. There are variations of doing this, and other people might say I'm wrong, or I should do this, or I should do that. This is what works for me, has always worked for me. Some tips that I've picked up along the way are built into there, and I personally feel this is a good way of putting decals down and having a nice painted on finish. So you've given your model some gloss coat, you've poured your water. Next thing is to take your decal off the sheet. And there's 2 things that you need to know about removing your decal from the sheet. The first one is not to use a knife, but to use scissors if you can. Sometimes they can be a little bit crammed together and it's difficult to get in with scissors, but generally most of the time little miniature scissors like these Tamiya ones, are not a problem. The second thing is to ensure that you don't have anything other than the decal on. So we're going to cut this red one out. Its number is 32. We don't want to take the number off because the number is also a decal and it will also float free in there. And when it does, it could well float onto that decal, and then you'd be amazed how they get stuck on there, never to come off, and it can ruin your decal. Believe me, I experience these things, so I can share it, and you don't have to. So you might be wondering why we take the decal off with scissors and not a knife. Well, let me show you. When you've got decals close together, a knife will cause you a problem, because when you cut through paper with a knife, it creates a little mound. It's like ploughing a furrow, and it rips the paper, it rips the surface, and it creates a little mound, and that can damage or distort your decal. It's rare that it does, and if you've got lots of space around it, you can certainly cut it out with a knife and it's not going to cause you a problem. But scissors will give you a nice sharp cut every time. so it doesn't disturb anything. It's just good practice. My next tip is, what I generally usually do is have 2 decals on the go at a time. So by that I mean I'll have 1 in soak, 1 ready to go, so that when I come to remove my first decal that's in the water, I can get the second one straight on, and it just speeds up your process. You're working through the waiting time of that soaking. Now, here again, lots of people have different methods. Everyone soaks them in a bath of water. Some people will have the decal, particularly small ones, on a blob of water on a bottle top, or we'll dip it and then we'll put it to one side and just let the water slowly soak into the paper so that the decal becomes loose. Me, I like to leave them in there until I'm ready. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this first decal soak up so much water into the paper that it actually separates from the backing paper and floats away. Now that's something you really don't want to do, but I'm going to show you what to do if that happens to you, because one of the things about decals is they're all very different, and some of them take longer to soak than others. So it depends on who's made your decals, how quickly they come off, how thin the decal is, how much material that there is around them, the size of your decal. All of that will have a bearing on how quickly your decal comes off. So after you've soaked your decals for a while, and you think they might be ready to come off, what we do is we take the decal out on its paper, and I just give it a little rub between my finger and my thumb just to see if it's loose. And if it's not loose, I put it back in because it's not ready to come off. What we want it to do is, under my thumb, just slide. Then we know it's ready. There you go, you can see that one is ready. And we can leave it on the paper, and we're ready to take that off. Now there's different ways of taking that off, and we'll go through that in a minute. But what I want this to do is float off. Like that. So if your decal floats off, it's not an issue. You can put decals on without the backing paper, which actually is one of my preferred methods, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But if your decal floats off, what you can do is come underneath it with your paper, recapture it, get it back on your backing paper like that, so that you can then apply it in the way that you want. All the decals you can pick up out of the water and you can apply them straight on, and I do that quite a lot of the time actually. But with long decals you don't want to do that, because this is what happens. Let me show you. When you pick it up, well, this one's not going to do it, but what quite often happens is the decal will curl up, and it'll get in a tangle, and it'll get all ravelled up, and you've got a bit of a mess on your hands. Now if that happens, the best thing you can do is put the whole decal back in the water, and a lot of it should unravel, and then if you give it a mess around, bit of a prod, you should get it back to where you need it to be. So you can put decals on straight out of the water, but you need to make sure they're not going to curl up or gather up on you. And decals with writing on and things like that are very prone to curling. So that's why most people take their decals out on a backing paper. It prevents any curling. So let's have a look at this one. So that decal is now ready. So this is one of the ways that people commonly put a decal on. What they do is they go to an area where they want to put the decal on, and then with a brush or their finger or whatever they want to use, they tease it off and place it. And then got a bit of water underneath, so you can then position it. So you place it as close as you can to where you want it, then you position it. Now what I like to do is then go in with a little pad of paper, just put the corner on that wet area and drain the excess water away, and that will start the process of your decal starting to bed down. Then using a brush we can squeegee out the remaining water, and when you're happy that the decal isn't going to move because you've sort of pressed it down with your brush, you can just pat on the top of it. Now this is the point where you can now with your brush just go in and tease it into some of those cracks and crevices. And what I like to do at this point is go along with a knife, and using the back of a knife just go around all of your panel lines or anything that you want that to sit in, and then we're just going to leave it. So at this point we're not putting decal fix or a softener on the decal at all. We just want it to dry off for a moment or two. Now again, some people will disagree with me. Some people will have put decal fix on the model before the decal goes on. Personally, I don't like doing that because actually it's starting to act as like an adhesive. It's immediately attacking the decal, making it softer, and for me, you're much more at risk of damaging your decal and finding it more difficult to move it around. So for me, you put a decal on with some water. In fact, I sometimes will get a dab of water on my finger and put it on the model first so that I know there's plenty of water there to move my decal around. Well, my preferred method of applying a decal is not what we've just done there. I like to get a wet finger and get the area where the decal's going on wet so I know there's some water on the substrate. I then like to tease the decal over the edge of the paper and take it off the paper. And I like to apply the decal without the paper. I find I've got more control doing that than I might have if I'm trying to slide it off a bit of paper. I just don't like the lack of control doing it that way. So I can add a decal like so. Just take the excess water off all the way around. Now at this point I can move this around with my finger if I wish. I'm going to go around with my paintbrush. So this is the one that I would put decaling solution on. So I'd only use this brush for decals. And we can go around and just squeeze any water out and get the decal nice and flat. There you go. And there's no problem getting a decal to go over on top of another one, unless of course they're a bit opaque. It could make the colour deeper where it overlaps the decal, so that's something to be mindful of. Okay, so I'm going to come back to this decal now. So we've got that on, but it's not really doing what we want in terms of sinking into our panel lines and the such. So this is the point where I put some softener on. It's dry to the touch, and in this case I'm using Decal Fix, but it doesn't really matter. And I like to just liberally go over the whole thing. And what's going to happen is that's going to start flashing off around the decal, but in the decal's going to start soaking it in, and the chemicals in your decal fix or whatever softener you're using is going to start sinking into this, and it's going to soften up. Now, different softeners work slightly differently, as in how they react with the decals, and it also depends on the decal. So some decals will crinkle up a little bit, some will crinkle up a lot, some won't hardly crinkle up at all, but they are all softening. You can see here it's actually lifting. I can get my brush underneath that now. So it's lifting itself, it's gathering itself up, it's almost contracting, and then it's going to relax. So we're just going to leave that for a moment, let it do its thing. And I tend to rinse my brush in my decal water, because that's not going to do it any harm at all. Right, let's have a look at what we're going to do with this decal that's been dry now for about 12 hours. We want to see a better line along that panel line. So the way I go about doing it is very lightly with the blade side of my knife, just drag it over the decal in the groove of the line that you want to improve. And I'm not pressing down hard, I am not pressing down at all, I'm just dragging my knife over it like so. And what that's doing is it's slightly stretching the decal and pushing it down. It might cut through in a couple of places, but you're likely to be putting panel line wash in there anyway, aren't you? So we've done that with the knife, and then we can go in with our decal softening solution of choice. And we will talk about Microsol Microset in a minute, but I'm continuing to use the Humbrol decal fix at this time. And I like to paint it into the line first, and then over the whole decal. So even though this has been dry for 12 hours plus, the decal will absolutely soften. And we should see that it will sink into the texturing there on that tail flap. So let's see how that gets on. Now on this decal here, we've got two issues. Well, I suppose we've got three issues actually. One is we've got panel lines that can hardly be seen when you compare it to what you should see. But we're dealing with that decal there, and that's just going around it with a knife and softening it so it conforms. But here we've got an issue where we've got big folds where the decal has not actually even made contact with the model because there is a lump, and then we've got some air bubbles here where the decal has gone over an area. Now if you look, the decal is sat perfectly nicely all the way around, so that is trapped air. So let's deal with that issue next. So that is where our pin comes in. My solution, which I've used now for quite some time, is to just prick a little hole in the decal. You're not wiggling it around and stuff that's going to damage the decal. You're just putting a little pinprick in. And then we're going to go around with some softener. And those pinholes that we've just put in is going to allow the softener to go in, and more importantly, the air to escape. And we'll be able to, as the decal softens and stretches and then contracts, we'll be able to remove any air. You can see it now wrinkling where the softener is, and that's going to allow all that air to come out, and those bubbles should go. Whilst that's drying, let's deal with these great big floppy creases, and that's been caused by this lump. And I would ask you, before you put a decal down, to have a look at it and see if you've got a big lump like that, whether it's actually worth putting the decal down, or whether you want to paint it or paint part of it and just have a plan, because sometimes it's actually just easier to paint it than to try and put the decal down. So particularly with roundels, which is easy to make yourself a little circular paint mask, if you're going over a lump, that quite often can be an easier solution. But what we can do to try and improve this is take a knife, again nice and sharp, and run it down the centre of the crease, cutting through the decal. We'll do it here as well. And where it's just raised up and the decal has gone from this surface to that surface and is not in contact with the model, again we can just cut through very carefully the decal. And then when we've done that, we can go back in with our softener. And it's just like what we've done with the pins. Your decal softener is going to get underneath there. You're going to be able to push your air out. And in the case of where you've got these great big lumps, one will settle on top of the other, should close the gap. What I would say is, as your softener is starting to dry, just keep watching it, working it with your paintbrush, squeezing the air out, and you should find you'll be able to get a much closer settling of that decal. Now the lump on this, I've done this extreme, the lump on this I probably would be either cutting out a part of the decal and painting over it, or I would have painted this possibly. But that's not always possible. So there we go, we will now leave that to dry and see what happens. Okay, let's talk about silvering now. So silvering is the effect that you get when you put a decal down, and effectively you can see sort of silvery like patches underneath the clear film of your decal. So first thing to say is we painted just this section here with our gloss varnish on this wing and left this naturally as it was after painting, which is a matte blue. Now I've seen lots of people say actually a gloss varnish doesn't make a big difference and it's to do with the quality of your decals, and quite frankly it's nonsense. You can see here this is one decal. It's been placed on just with water, no softener or anything, just been taken off its backing paper and put on and allowed to dry naturally. And what we can see is we do have silvering on this side, but we have a lot less and we have huge amounts on here. And that's because the gloss varnish has made this this surface smoother and it's leveled it. Yes, we still have silvering, so we probably would have had a problem with the decal anyway, but without the gloss varnish we have a much bigger issue. I'm going to show you how to deal with that issue in a minute, but yeah, it makes a huge difference, a gloss varnish. That's why so many people do it. It just makes your life a lot easier. So let's deal with sorting out silvering. So to deal with the silvering, I'm going to use these products here, Microsol or Microset. Let's just talk about the difference. Now, one of them says it softens decals and improves adhesion. The other one says it softens decals to conform to irregular surfaces for a painted on look. Now, in my mind, basically they're the same thing. They're a decal softener. One of them is stronger than the other. So I tend to use this one more than this one. I bought these bottles at the same time and you can see I've used more of the microsol. I tend to use this on flat surfaces if I need to, and tend to use this where I've got some work to do to get it into panel lines or over lumps or whatever. So that's the one I tend to use more often. And what we're going to do to deal with the silvering problem is we're going to use these products to help us out, and we're going to go back to using our pin. So what we do, where we've got a little bit of silvering, we're going to take our pin and just make a little tiny pinprick, like so. Trying not to damage the decal, other than the hole you've punched in. And we put a little bit of microsol in, and you'll see instantly that's starting to sort the issue. What it's doing is it's getting in and forcing the air out, and as the decal softens, we can move that liquid around underneath that area and, like a squeegee, just get rid of the air. Now sometimes it takes more than one go, depends on how bad it is, but you can see that is now slowly starting to go. Now also we want to get it to set better in those lines, so we're going to go back to the knife. So I'm being a little bit heavy-handed here because I'm trying to show you and have it visible to the camera. So also I've just run the knife along after I've softened it, and really you should do it before, because you can see I've damaged the decal doing that. But you can see the main aim here was to get rid of the silvering, and you can see that we've largely done that. And when that dries, if there's still any left, we can go back and repeat that process where we've got these silverings here. Just give it a prod with a pin again. So on this side, we've got no panel line. So we just do the same thing. Roughly in the sort of centre of your silvering. And this time we're going to use just the micro set, and you can see instantly getting in through that hole, getting underneath the decal, you see instantly that's so much better. So we're going to have to let that fully dry, and then we'll come back and see if there's anything left. So you can see how much better that is after just one attempt with the softener, and basically you just keep going back in, make a little hole wherever you've got a bit of silver in, keep flooding it with softener, and eventually you will get it all to sit. When you're happy that your decal is now settled the way you want it, you seal it with another clear coat, whether that be matte or gloss or satin, it really doesn't matter, whatever you're going to be doing next. So give it a coat of varnish, and when it dries it should look like it was painted on. You won't see any of the outside mark of the decal, any decal film, and it'll just look like part of the paintwork. So there we have it, our decal placed on, softened, panel lines done, and then it's been given a varnish, and you would not know that that was not painted on, and that's exactly what we're looking for. Now there are other things you can do to make it look worn and stuff like that, but they're painting tips, not decal tips. So for me, that's our decal tips done. I hope that was interesting and helpful in any way, particularly if you're new to the hobby, coming back to the hobby. That's how I go around doing my decals. So thank you all, take care, enjoy your modelling, and I will see you very soon.